Today we will talk about feudalism. Feudalism was a social and political system developed in Europe during the Middle Ages, between 10th to 13th century CE. In the feudal system, social hierarchy was developed based on administrative control and exchange of land for services. It was basically in exchange for military services. The hierarchy pyramid included kings, nobles and lords, knights and peasants. There is no standard definition for feudalism because we don't know where exactly and when it began. So the generally accepted definition shows the traits found in Europe, especially in England, when the king held all the land, which he later distributed it to his vassals in exchange for military services. But according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the dominant social system in medieval Europe, in which the nobility held lands from the crown in exchange for military services, and vassals were in turn tenants of the nobles, which the peasants were obliged to live on their lord's land and give him homage, labor, and a share of the produce, notionally in exchange for military protection. The word feudalism derives from the medieval Latin terms feudalus meaning fee and feudum meaning fief. The fee signified the land given as a payment for regular military services. It is also believed that the feudal system originated in the Roman Empire after its fall. Kingdom of France in the 8th century CE gave land to his nobles as a reward in order to receive their services. Then the feudal system became widespread in the 11th century CE in Western Europe. Feudalism system was generally developed by primarily Christian nations. The feudalism era has some of its own terms and definitions. The first one is Court of Common Pleas, a common law court to hear pleas involving disputes between individuals. Almost all civil litigation was within its term of reference, as was supervision of manorial and local courts without involving the king. Another one is fine, a sum of money paid to the crown to obtain some grant, concession, or privilege. Unlike amnesment, a fine was not a monetary penalty, although failure to offer and pay a customary fine for some right would undoubtedly lead for an amercement. Merchant, in Middle Ages England, a fine paid to a lord on a daughter's marriage in recompense for the loss of a worker. Ordeal was an ancient judicial practice by which the guilt or innocence of the accused was determined by subjecting them to a painful or at least an unpleasant, usually dangerous experience. The test was one of the life or death, and the proof of innocence was survival. Relief was one-off fine or form of taxation payable to an overlord by the heir of a feudal tenant to license him to take possession of an estate in land by inheritance. It is comparable to a death duty or inheritance tax. Sheriff, the official who was the chief administrative and judicial officer of a shire. Many of his jobs were taken over by the intendant, justice, coroner, and justice of the peace. He collected taxes and forwarded them to the exchequer after taking his share. Also responsible for making sure the king's table was well stocked while the king was in his county. Tally was an ancient memory aid device, a notched stick used to record and document numbers, quantities, or even messages. It was split in two, one half being kept by the seller and the other half by the receiver. Yardland, vergate or yard of land by an English unit of land, primarily a measure of tax assessment rather than area. The vergate was usually but not always reckoned as a quarter hide nationally equal to 30 acres. Feudalism was a novel social system. This slide shows the top features of feudalism like castle, manor, demesne, the feudal society, the knight, and the rights and duties of feudal lords. The castle was the chief characteristic of feudalism. The feudal lords lived in huge castles or forts. Another significant mark of feudalism was a manor. The land associated with the castle was known as a manor. This was like a small estate. Another feature of feudalism was demesne. After distributing the land among his serfs, whatever land remained with him was known as demesne. Another characteristic feature of the feudal society was knighthood. A knight took oath to fight with the enemy and to protect the weak. Generally, the sons and relatives of a lord received education and training to be a knight. The lords had many duties to perform. Most of them were employed in the work of the government, army, and diplomacy. They also looked to the administration of estates, draining of swamps, and trade and commerce. Feudal society contemplated three social strata: nobility, clergy, and serfs. The clergy were responsible for cherishing the spirituality of the feudal community. The nobility was composed by the king and the nobles. The servants, in turn, constituted the greater part of the peasant community and were generally farm workers. The social strata that existed in feudalism were considered sealed. For this reason, those who were born in a certain social class would most likely remain in it until end of life. The servants, the lower social class of feudalism, generally received feudal lords for cultivation. Servants developed a bond of allegiance, obedience, and subordination. When the gift of goods was made from one noble to another, the author of the gift was called suzerain. This donation of goods does not necessarily indicate the donation of land. Often it was granted the use of certain agricultural equipment, the exemption of the payment of certain taxes. During the 13th century, the feudalism system started to decline for a number of reasons. The system became shaky and less controlled, the social hierarchy were questioned, and because of Black Death, caused loss of life and the workforce to decline along with the abandoned states. And money became a form of payment and reward along with the original system of war. People realized the power independent practices, rich merchant classes, and only were loyal to their suppliers and business customers. In conclusion, land is power, which earns you social hierarchy and a place in the system. Every term or law was clearly laid out in the feudal system, making it hard to dispute. You couldn't work your way up in the feudal system. The social class you were born into, you were most likely to stay stuck in that for life. Servants had to be loyal to the lords. As people, position, and rules and power became questioned, the people realized they had the power to ruin the system by revolting and not obeying, causing it to cripple.